Yeah, that was Rick Callender, president of the California State NAACP. There you have it. That sets the stage for our discussion. We have a great panel on tonight. We just want to bring all of these great minds together and just kind of chat about it. Let's talk about this situation here. First off, we have Carolyn Fowler. She is the chair of the Women's Caucus for the California State Democratic Party. She's also on the Democratic National Committee. She's a Hall of Famer, if you ask me, and let's bring her in there. Good morning, good afternoon, Carolyn. How are you today?
Well, great, Greg. Always pleased to join you again with the other distinguished guests we have this evening.
Yes. Go right ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, in addition to some of the titles you gave me, I'm also currently co-chair with the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee for the state. I'm also state president for the National Federation of Democratic Women. A lot of my work and other activism, I'm vice chair of the California Senior Legislature, where we work on policy for seniors. I was appointed by the LA County Registrar for the Voting Systems for All People Advisory Board. I'm retired AT&T director, and I am local 1932 member. But currently, we have a lot of action today. I'm government affairs advisor for LAUSD board member Dr. George McKenna. And I'm also very proud to be a Golden Soar of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Inc., Incorporated, hailing from Detroit, Michigan. I have a BBA from University of Michigan and a Wharton MBA from Penn State University, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Wow, that's what's up. Yes, Carolyn. Yes, great. Next up, let's bring in, he's from the California Republican Assembly, live from Sacramento, my new friend, Craig DeLuz. Good morning. Good afternoon, Craig.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, sir. Tell the people a little bit about you real quickly.
Okay, well, I am the communications director for the California Republican Assembly, the oldest and largest grassroots conservative organization, which happens to be headed by Johnny Morgan, a brother from down there in LA. And I say brother, I mean a brother. I also have worked in the California State Legislature for Assemblyman Tim Leslie and for Assemblyman Kevin Jeffries. I also do a lot of political commentary, mostly surrounding the Second Amendment and education issues.
All right. Welcome.
I'm also an elected school board member here in Sacramento.
That's what I heard. That's right. All right. Thank you so much for your time today. All right. Next up, we have right here in Long Beach, representing the 8th District in the beautiful city of Long Beach, California, our good friend, Councilmember Al Austin. Good afternoon, sir. You there, Al?
There it goes.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. That's all right. We're going to get it together in just a hot second here. Dr. Anthony Samad, you there?
I'm here, sir. How are you?
Doing all right. Thank you. Oh, wow. But you can hear me just fine there, right, Dr. Samad? You there?
I can hear you just fine. Heard everybody.
All right.
You want me to sound off on my litany of accomplishments?
Yes, sir. I'd love for you to do that. Thank you so much.
I am the director of the Mervyn Dymally African American Political Economic Institute. And we are a nonpartisan think tank that studies the history of African Americans in California since 1850. And we also analyze and influence public policy. We also train the next generation of civic engagers and those who desire to serve in public office. And we promote culture. Prior to me coming to the Dymally Institute, I was a 25-year professor, as well as a 25-year syndicated columnist. I'm an author of 6 books and director or producer of 4 films. And basically, I am a person who has been active in the Los Angeles community for 40 years as the youngest NAACP president, president of 100 Black men. and involved in public discourse during most of that time.
Y'all heard the president of the California State NAACP. I'm actually going to start with Mr. DeLuz there. I'd love to hear your immediate reaction to what you heard on today.
No real reaction. It's got to be, look, I agree. If you don't show up to vote, then that means that somebody else is making a decision for you. It's vitally important that number one, that people show up to vote. But I think we've demonstrated that in elections, when Black folks show up to the polls, we make a difference.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, Craig, now listen, you know, we're bombarded with so many, advertisements and announcements and pronouncements. Is this a total Republican campaign against the current administration in the state, or what's the deal?
Well, no, first of all, understand that, first of all, to get 1.7 million signatures, this is clearly not just a Republican issue. One only need look at the fact that a large number of Democrats actually signed the petition. A large number of independents actually signed the petition as well. And even keep in mind that this is not the first petition that went forward. Really, what this petition stems out of are substantive issues. In particular, in terms of the governor's dealing with the decision-making and how he's really dealt with issues relating to the pandemic and issues even before then. But I think really it was how he handled the pandemic that really has gotten a lot of folks to decide that it might be time for him to go.
Now, what do you say to those of us who are like, okay, but the pandemic that's unscheduled. That was just, who would have thought a global pandemic would have taken us out to where we're safer at home and all of that? Aren't all of these politicians just like making it up as they go along, given the resources that they have?
Well, here's what I will tell you. When we elect people to office, we don't just elect them to lead us when everything is going great and everything is going fine. Part of what their job is also to do is that when challenging times come, you have a duty and a responsibility to step up to the plate and manage those times. And to lead. And unfortunately, in the case of Governor Gavin Newsom, he hasn't led real well. And, you're right. There are certain things that are going to happen because, it's a pandemic and nobody is blaming the pandemic on the governor. But when one takes a look, for example, at $2 billion in fraud in our California's unemployment in just the last year, 500 million of it alone were checks that were written to individuals who are currently in correctional facilities, thus probably shouldn't be collecting unemployment checks. Things like that are substantive issues, and quite frankly, the very same department has up to 200,000, a backlog of 200,000 claims for unemployment. He was the first to shut down the schools, and he was the last to reopen them. And when asked by school board members, and I'm a school board member, I don't want to send my kids to school, or our kids to school, or have our kids come to school when it's dangerous. But when we ask you for the data and the science that supports the idea of closing those schools, and you refuse to share anything with us because, oh, by the way, the tens of millions of dollars that you spent on contact tracing, you completely messed that program up. That's another example. He shut down churches, and we understand why they had restrictions on occupancy and all of that, and masks and all that for a bunch of business. But for some reason, he singled out churches to say, well, rather than just have an occupancy, we're going to say you can't have, it's going to be 25% or 100 people, whichever is less. Now, I happen to attend Calvary Christian Center here in Sacramento. We have a 3,500 seat sanctuary. How are you going to tell me that we can't socially distance enough with 25% of the people? How 100 people would barely take up one row. Once again, and by the way, he was taken to court on that and lost. He was taken to court on not providing the data and the information to schools and lost. Anyway, I share all this to say that there's more than just a Republican cabal. There are actually substantive issues relating to the governor's performance that has people wanting him to not be governor anymore.
All right, all right. Okay, so Carolyn Fowler, do you agree with that? Are there Democrats and others also joining this call to recall the governor?
Well, to get 1.7 million signatures, there had to be, because there are not that many registered Republicans in the state. So I don't dispute that. But with all due respect to Mr. DeLuz, when the United States, so the CDC declares a public health crisis, most governors should be following the science along with that. As California has made progress, we have
It
probably
should
have
be,
made
but
the
he
most
wasn't.
progress in the country in terms of the COVID-19. We follow the science aggressively. Under his leadership, our state has beaten the pandemic. We have some of the highest vaccination levels in the country, leaving us better protected against variants. When we talk about the rates, I can just share with you, and we do have the data. Since school started back at LAUSD, there have only been 3 incidents, 3. And because of the level of contact tracing, with all due respect, is how we captured that data. And we also have a backup plan for should something spread further, with more direct one-on-one training for the students, as well as if there happens to be a situation where we have to quarantine a classroom. So I think as far as the COVID piece, the governor has done exceptionally well. We've had the worst maternal mortality rate among developed countries, and the risk of pregnancy-related deaths was 3 to 4 times, as everybody knows, higher for Black women than for white women. And that's according to the Center for Disease Control. And fortunately for us, recognizing that, the governor did sign a bill aiming to address that issue of Black women dying in childbirth at disproportionately rates. And this legislation now will require hospitals and clinics in the state to implement implicit bias training for all healthcare workers and providers. And it also requires the state health department to track and publish the data around pregnancy-related deaths in an effort to better understand what's going on there. So I could go on about different health. He has a master plan for aging that doesn't exist anywhere else in the country, with specific goals and taken major steps to pick input from, as you know, what happened with the nursing home situation. Many of those patients not only were Blacks and Latinos targeted, but many of the nursing home patients, of which many Blacks and Latinos were suffering from the COVID. And so having this master plan on aging and what we do moving forward is critical. So I think for more importantly, if we want to talk about health, the number one issue, thanks to Texas now, is how we protect women's right to choose. And so I'm asking any woman that's within an earshot of me to contact their congressperson on the Women's Health Protection Act. That's sponsored by our own Congresswoman, Judy Chu. And on the 17th, there's going to be a rally about that. And so that when they get back to Congress, our Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, is going to lead the efforts on that. So women have to be able to count on a right to choose and protect their health. And women both Black and Latino women were hurt the most in this state by COVID-19.
All right, all right. So, Dr. Sabab, we've heard both sides, Republican side, Democratic side. What do we think about all of this? I mean, why not wait until the next real election cycle to tear apart all of this stuff?
Well, first of all, I want to make clear I'm neither Democrat or Republican. I left the Democratic Party in 1988 when the Democrats lied to Jesse and didn't put him on the ticket. I do think the Democratic Party does a very poor job of educating their electorate. They'll tell you who to vote for, but they won't tell you why. And basically, a lot of our rights have been stripped as a result of the ballot initiative process. Direct democracy is when let the people decide when they can't get it through the legislature. And the ballot initiative process is basically how the Republicans misuse politics and misuse public policy to get their way after they lose elections. And we've seen this before. You know, we saw this in 2003 when the Republicans used the very same argument of gas price hikes to recall Gray Davis. And then the Democrats, you know, basically contributed to, you know, to the demise of Gray Davis by having the lieutenant governor place his name on the recall ballot and splitting the Democrats. And that's how we ended up with Arnold Schwarzenegger. This time, at least, they all stayed in the tent. But you have a lot of people still confused about what a recall is. A recall is when you want to remove somebody because of malfeasance in office, because they did something illegal, and you don't want to be stuck with them until until the duration of their term. And so what we see is a Republican Party who barely exists in California, as Ms. Fowler said. You know, essentially Democrats are 2/3 of the state. You know, you had Gavin Newsom, who won 3 years ago by 2/3 of the state. And so you essentially have 1.7 million people. And in 2018, 12,700,000 people voted. Okay, so the analogy is it's equivalent to you being in a group of 10 people and one person decides which way the group is going to go. What Democrats failed to do was to correct the reform process after Gray Davis was recalled. California has the lowest threshold for recall of any state in the union, 12%. Okay, most states have 20 to 25%. You know, you have a couple of states out there that have 40%, which is why you never see a recall in other states. But this is a way that the Republicans can manipulate the process and then put a bunch of candidates on the ballot, and they can win the governorship with 20%. Okay, Arnold got 20%. You know, Elder is polling between 15 and 20%. There's no way that they could win the governorship in an outright election. So they use the technicalities of the ballot initiative process to undermine representative democracy. We really shouldn't even be in a recall. You know, the recall costs $240 million. Okay, what could be done in a state that's in crisis, that is in the middle of a pandemic, you know, that is in the middle of climate change and in the middle of a homeless crisis, and we're wasting $240 million on about, that's the Democrats' fault. So the one thing I do agree with Secretary of State Shirley Weber is the first thing we should do after this recall is over is to reform the recall process, which has been in place since, you know, damn near California became a state in the 1800s. And never allow a small group, a theocracy, to be able, or an oligarchy, small group, you know, to be able to manipulate a whole state like this. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I would advocate the Democratic Party doing is doing better in their voter education. Voting is more than just voting for personality. It's about teaching people what a democracy is, and particularly what the legislative process is as it relates to direct democracy and ballot initiatives.
All right. Interesting. Certainly a lot to think about right there. Let's take it in. I think Councilman Al Austin is ready to go. You there, sir? Uh-oh.
I am here. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Excellent. All right. So now you've heard us, had a chance to hear, you know, all of our panelists and everything, you know. All right. Let me just start you in on this. What is the work of Governor Newsom? How does that look like on the municipal level? You're there, you're in city council, you're making stuff happen. What do you think? Has he made a lot of errors in this pandemic time, or what's the perspective?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself, what are you comparing it to? And I think reality is that there's no playbook, and there's never been a playbook for the type of crisis that we're facing today with COVID-19, this pandemic, the economic challenges that it's caused, but also more importantly, the health challenges. The recall, in my opinion, and I'll just go straight, I think it's senseless, it's wasteful, and it's very risky for California. Clearly, it's a political power grab, and this recall process is really making a mockery out of Californians, the voters, our election process, and making a mockery out of our democracy. And so your question, how has Governor Newsom supported our city? I think he's done a great job in supporting the city of Long Beach. You know, we've been able to keep people in their homes and keep people fed. The basic resources of shelter, food, housing is also important. We've been able to provide, I want to say, at least 400 new beds in terms of Project Home Key, us purchasing motel rooms and wraparound services and social services for those experiencing homelessness. Obviously, we're just scratching the surface with the homelessness issue, but no governor, up until the time we have Governor Newsom, has ever put as much resources into that challenge. And I've been on the city council now for 9 years, and for all 9 years, we've been asking Sacramento to step in and do more. Governor Newsom actually has committed more, and we are able to do more for that population now. Obviously, it's a crisis that we still are grappling with, but this is not the time, in my opinion, to risk changing governance in one of the largest, or the largest state in the nation, one of the largest economies in the world. There's too much at risk, too much at stake, and this recall is a bad news for California.
Now, you know, I'm seeing some comments here. Craig, you say we have the highest homeless rate in California, and is that the present governor's fault, or is that something that's been going on? You know, is that a byproduct of the times?
Well, I would say it's a byproduct of Democratic control, Democratic policies. In the state of California, for example, to build a single-family home, it costs an additional $80,000 in permits and fees alone. Once again, just to build one unit of single-family housing. We have the highest home prices. Once again, largely due to regulations. Now, granted, not all of that can be put on the governor, but the governor is the one who runs the programs that implement these things. The other thing is, though, a lot of it will put on the legislature, which has been controlled by the Democrats, I believe, with the exception of a 1-year period for the last 60 years. I think that's fair enough to say. They're the ones who pass the laws that put these laws in place. The only thing that a Republican can do is basically stand in the way of by the ability to veto some of that legislation. But there are, once again, I've already noted there are a number of things that he's done, once again, just during his term. He signed a bill into law, for example, AB 5, which actually took a lot of small independent business owners and basically changed contract licensing law or independent contractor law such that, they lost their livelihood. They were no longer going to be able to do what they were going to do. Had it not been for the initiative process, many of them would still not have the ability to be able to earn income. We're in a position right now where we've seen wildfires just about every year. Yet, instead of doing what he said he was going to do and spend money on forestry and deforesting, by the way, which he didn't do, he closed 8 fire camps. And now we're looking at the largest fire in our state's history. Once again, these are all things that he's done during his time that were within his control. Someone said earlier, the recall election is for when someone's done malfeasance. If you look at the law and you look at the definition of a recall, you don't have to be guilty of malfeasance. A certain number of the people just have to decide, yeah, you're doing a bad enough job. We don't want you to be in office anymore. And California has a legal process. If you want to change the process, there's a process to do that. But we can't get angry when someone follows the law and then accuse them of manipulating the law.
Okay, so Craig, let me just kind of rewind a little bit to AB5, right? Okay, so when they passed that in Sacramento, I really am convinced they did not take into consideration all of the industries that the AB5 would affect. As an example, I mean,
It wasn't that they weren't told, though. It wasn't that they weren't told, because person after person went to them and testified. Black, white, people in the entertainment, a bunch of people went, and they still decided to put it in place. It wasn't that they weren't told.
But is that the will of the governor, or is it the will of the various senators and assembly persons up there in Sacramento?
Well, part of the challenge is, and I will give, I'm about to do something I normally would not do, and that is give a Democrat some credit.
Wow.
Jerry Brown understood that with both parties being in complete control of everything, that someone had to be the adult in the room, and that he couldn't give the legislature everything that they wanted. Right? Someone had to say, no, this needs to go back. It needs to be redone, or this needs to be changed, or this is a policy that isn't going to work. Unfortunately, Gavin Newsom has demonstrated that he will sign just about anything that Democrats send to his desk. So because of that, and once again, this was something that was largely supported by labor unions, because, well, they didn't like the fact that independent contractors, people who small business owners were actually making money. They wanted to unionize them. He decided, and he went with the politics, and he went ahead and he signed it. He had the ability to veto it. And he's had the ability to veto a number of bad pieces of legislation that's come his way. And he just hasn't demonstrated the will and the good judgment to be able to do so.
Well, Carolyn Fowler, circling back to the homelessness question. I mean, I'm just thinking he inherited it. I think Dr. Samad said in these comments here, so in 2012, I'm actually probably thinking even since the Reagan administration. I remember doing some work out on LA Skid Row and looking at the Union Rescue Mission security video and watching ambulances just drop people off out there on Skid Row and all that. Is that the governor's fault, or is that medical, institutional fault, just trying to get rid of folks? You muted there, Carolyn. Let me see if I can get you.
I apologize. I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
I think we're being totally honest. The homelessness crisis didn't just start with this governor's administration. If you'll recall, when we go back to what happened with the banking industry and how people were put out of their homes due to some legislation that occurred within the federal administration under the Republican administration leadership. I don't think we ever even recovered from that crisis, let alone adding COVID and anything else, whether it's floods, fire. I mean, it's really uncanny that all of these things are happening simultaneously, to be quite honest. And it's not just a California problem. I wanted to come back to, and I guess I'll have to rely on perhaps Dr. Samad, but I wanted to come back to Mr. DeLuz's 60-year history. I just read an article last week talking about the infrastructure of the legislature. And that has been Republican from day one, and we've never changed it. And that's part of our problem, that entire infrastructure and how we make legislation, period. But I do agree with Dr. Samad. When you get bit once, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We should have gone back after, and even Mr. Schwarzenegger, Governor Schwarzenegger says he's surprised that we haven't gone back and taken a look at some of the reforms that we should for that issue. I think the governor had come up with all type of creative ways, room key, how to 30-some thousand units of housing, but housing is just such a complex issue. And we're concerned that from what I see from the legislature is always a one-size-fits-all stroke of the pen. And if you look at California, you have the rural, you have your urban, you have and small cities, small pockets, coastals. but these bills come out with no affordable housing in them, not one, not one. And so until we recognize what can happen there and come up with individual, and I call it back to local control. I know it hasn't necessarily worked so well, but I think people are starting to get that now that people are sleeping on the streets right next to their neighborhood. They are willing to reconsider how we might do housing, whether it's, and the problem I see the most is we keep dealing with for-profit developers. Well, we should be dealing with nonprofits. We should be looking at land trusts. We should be looking at all other types of alternatives. And to my brothers and sisters in the building and trades, I say to them, we've got to look at how we can build cheaper with more sturdy products. And we have to understand there are products out there that are fireproof, waterproof, and we're not looking at training our people to be ready to take on that, and that means more jobs in their industry for them. And now is the time to start learning about those products and starting to build with those tools. So housing is not going to be solved in a moment, but we are going to have to make some major changes on several sides as to how we get to housing people.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Austin, are you getting the money from Sacramento? Are you seeing some results? They're saying there's funding coming through, or they're trying to debate how that gets down to the municipalities. What are you seeing down here on the street?
We have received the support from Sacramento. In fact, when Long Beach, we were in a unique situation. We're a large city that falls under 500,000 people, right, in terms of population. I think, and so we ran into a situation when Congress and the previous administration allocated CARES Act dollars. Long Beach didn't get the allocation that large cities get because we fell right under that 500,000 population threshold. And it was the governor who stepped up and said, you know what, we will make sure that Long Beach gets its allocation from the state to make sure that we were able to meet the needs in our community presented by COVID-19 and the challenges that came with that. That was a huge boost for us. And obviously, when the next series of stimulus was considered in Congress, the model was done a little differently and more equitably to ensure that we got our fair share. But the governor stepped up for our city in big ways during this crisis. We thank him for that. We recognize it, but we also recognize that, again, no one has ever faced these type of challenges before. And the cast of individuals who have signed up to replace Governor Newsom should this recall go through, none of them have that experience either. Again, we're looking at individuals who are entertainers. Some have government experience at local government levels, but none have had the experience to run a state. And again, I think it would be very, very risky to recall the governor at this juncture, especially with everything that we're dealing with right now.
Greg, can I make one more comment about housing?
Yes.
A critical point. Look, we're looking for leadership. This is not to be the renter's capital of the world. We're looking for leadership that is going to provide and come up with policies and legislation that put people on the path to home ownership. There are people working 2 jobs right now that are paying horrific rents that if they had a path to home ownership, they could be paying a house note. This is the type of creativity that we're talking about. And that's why people are looking at products like public banking as alternatives. We must be asking our legislators to be more creative about how we can house the people working that are homeless. That's insane. So there has to be some creativity around how we move forward in providing housing for the people in the state of California.
So I would just raise a question on that. So the current governor, who's currently in the process of a recall, and the legislature haven't demonstrated, well, the legislature hasn't demonstrated in umpteen years that they have the ability or the creativity. This governor hasn't demonstrated that he has the creativity. You know, worst case scenario, why risk letting him get reelected next year? A Republican governor coming in, whoever that governor might be, is only going to be there for a year and is still going to have to deal with supermajorities in both the Assembly and the Senate. Why not put yourself in a position to have a better, more creative leader to be able to lead California to implement these policies that you talked about? Because, like I said, clearly Gavin Newsom has demonstrated he's not the guy.
Well, two things. One,
I disagree.
I don't believe in experimenting. Two, what Al said was absolutely correct. None of those people that are running now have mentioned any of the things that I talked about in terms of housing and how to go about it. So if they had said that, they might have stood a better chance of being considered. But if I look at their skills and what they're saying as they go around the state, I have not heard one person talk about a plan for housing, and specifically affordable housing.
How many of the campaign speeches have you listened to?
Quite a few. You might be surprised. I do pay attention. I do. I have a huge conglomerate in Orange County, so I have to listen more maybe than I like to.
All right, I tip of the cap to you then. Tip of the cap to you.
Yeah, I'm open for a good idea. I don't care who it comes from, to be quite honest. If it'll house these people, then I'm with you.
Yeah, I think what needs to be amplified to the voters is that we are facing multiple crises at the same time right now. And it's not the governor's fault. This is just a perfect storm of crises. You know, Governor Newsom has literally spent 2 years in office, or 4 years of a 4-year term dealing with a pandemic almost. And I would just say that's unprecedented. I'm not making excuses, but I think for the most part, you know, he's handled it as well as any leader could handle such an issue. Again, there's been no blueprint. There's no playbook on how to deal with a pandemic or how to recover from a pandemic. Many of our cities are doing well in many areas of the state. California was leading the nation in terms of vaccination rates and our rollout plan. That was well managed. There were some hiccups along the way, of course, but that's governance. And again, none of the alternatives have come up with a better idea or a better solution to the challenges that we face today. From housing, from climate change to, and let's just talk about what's at stake too. I think it's important to talk about what's at stake. What's at stake? It is California's values. California's values are at stake right now. You know, our voting rights, our collective bargaining rights, women's reproductive rights, all at stake right now. And hanging in the balance of this recall. And so California voters, if you're listening, make the right call. Just vote no and nothing else.
Greg, I'd like to jump in here. There's nothing better than I like than a good fight between Democrats and Republicans, but I didn't bring my popcorn today. And I know Mr. DeLuz got to leave in a minute. I want him to hear this next point. Thank you for the shout out, Ms. Fowler, because I appreciate that acknowledgement. But the problem is that we lose institutional memory, and that was brought about by term limits and the desire to get Willie Brown out of office. And so most of the elected officials don't have enough institutional memory to understand how state and local government is supposed to work. Okay. The biggest failure of Jerry Brown's administration was to eradicate the community redevelopment agency, because they were doing 80% of the affordable housing in all the municipalities throughout California. And so once that went away, the developer forces overtook the policy forces, and they were able to set the markets. A lot of people don't know that most of the housing prices are set by foreign REITs, real estate investment trusts, who have no interest in this community, and they basically just set the market. And because there was no new housing stock developed, then basically as the price of housing went up, you saw people fall out their houses, and people who were working, suddenly became homeless. Now, Mr. DeLuz thinks, that we are making excuses when he spent the first two minutes talking about how Gavin Newsom mishandled the COVID epidemic. And he knows, like we know, that this whole recall is being driven by anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers who threatened him that if he didn't open the economy last June, that they were going to recall him. He opened the economy and they went forward with it anyway. Okay. And that is all about the Trumpsters trying to reach into California. They say, okay, we can't take the state, but we can find this small little caveat that allows us to flip a Democratic governor. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about these issues, we have to take a deep dive on these issues. We really need to understand, why politics swings the way it does. Okay. They know they don't even have a chance of unelecting an incumbent Democratic governor next year. So they wanted to muddy him up this year. Okay. And so really what we should be talking about is the continual abuse of the legislative process that relates to propositions. For instance, in 2018, there were 4 quality of life initiatives on the ballot. All of the other ballot initiatives won except the quality of life initiatives. And the same thing happened in 2020. And they had us through the California NAACP going against the community's interests on 2 of those ballot initiatives. Okay. And so they understand that voter sophistication is an issue in Black and brown communities. They can recognize the name and they can do that. But when you have ballot initiatives that are complicated and they don't have a history or a background on how those ballot initiatives came about, and they're not aware of the PACs and the special interests, you talk about the labor unions, the biggest special interests in California are the prison unions and the police unions, okay, who basically kill legislation that has to do with social justice and social equity, okay? And so all of this fell in Gavin Newsom's lap. You remember, Jerry Brown had to cut out CRA because he inherited an economic mess from Arnold Schwarzenegger, okay? Right. So the first thing he had to do was cut to the bone. But that doesn't mean that CRA can't be restored, particularly in a state that had a $78 billion surplus this year. It's time to restore some of the things that have been cut away.
Dr. Samad, thank you. I really wish I had time. Unfortunately, I've got a school board meeting.
Oh, no, bro, it ain't time to go.
I do appreciate every point you made. I would love the opportunity to rebut it. I just want to say this, and I'm glad because you helped me fill out my bingo card. I heard abortion. I heard QAnon. I heard Donald Trump. I mean, I heard the I heard Trumpsters, so I heard the trifecta.
We heard all of the Republican talking points.
No. I heard all of the Democratic talking points as to why not to support the recall. All I'm going to say is, still haven't heard a substantive policy reason as to the fact that has he done a good job or hasn't he? How is he responded to all of these? I'm going to be putting up and I'll post a link I'm assuming this video will be up online. I'll put a link that'll have all of the points that I made today, along with a bunch of additional points with links to articles from mainstream media supporting every single reason why I believe this governor should be recalled. But let me just say one more thing. And I know people keep saying don't vote anything on the second one.
If you say one more thing, you better be.
Yes, I will say just to say this.
Recalls. Just answer.
Even if you vote no on the recall, you should vote on the second one because somebody's going to represent California.
That recall,
if the recall goes through.
You right now. Reach out to me on the 15th, okay? And we'll have a conversation.
Let's do that. Appreciate y'all. And very much enjoyed the conversation. Greg, thank you for having me.
Okay, one quick thing. Carolyn, go ahead and make your point real quick before he goes.
No, I just asked him, how do you address 67 recalls going on in this state if it's just an anomaly?
Well, I'm talking about the recall of the governor. I'm not dealing with 67 recalls. I'm just talking about gubernatorial recalls have only happened twice in the state of California.
That is a part of the whole plan. That's my point. 67 recalls. Come on.
All right. Well,
this is what we're going to do
another day. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Right. I'd like to invite you back here with let's meet you and Dr. Samad chop it up after the recall election. Let's see what's
that'll be a lot of fun. I look forward to it.
Your brother David, hi, he's one of my favorite people.
He's one of my favorite people too. He happens to be my favorite Democrat.
All right.
Y'all take care.
All right. That's Craig DeLuz. He's coming in from the California Republican Assembly. Wow. Yeah. There's a lot of meat in there. I mean, Dr. Samad, we're hearing all this stuff. And I mean, there's just too much at stake, it seems to me, and every man out here on these here in the community here, there just seems to be too much at stake to recall a governor only for a couple of months because we have an election next year. Right. Why are we even doing this doggone exercise?
Well, let me say this. Rather than we're doing it because of all of the reasons we stated earlier that I don't want to rehash, but let me say this, and this is an attribute to Secretary of State Shirley Weber. She has made it so easy for people to vote.
Yes.
She has sent it to your mailbox. You don't even have to put a stamp on it.
The governor wrote that article, that executive order. Governor Newsom wrote that executive order last year.
We should be talking about voter empowerment, civic engagement empowerment, and really we should be shaming folk that come up with these gazillion excuses why they can't vote.
Right.
Okay. Because we should have 95% voter turnout when the ballot comes to your house 6 weeks before an election and you go out of your house every day. All you got to do is drop it in the mailbox, drop it at the voting center. You ain't got to wait until September the 14th to stand in line to vote. And that's really the conversation we should be having is people need to understand that you can't talk about this being a democracy and you having rights and you pick the rights you want to exercise and ignore the rights that you don't. You want the right to say what you want to say. You want the right to express yourself the way you want to express yourself and shake your booty and cuss people out and all that kind of stuff. But democracies take work. Democracies don't work on autopilot, and those who engage democracies are those who get what they want. And those who don't become the victims of those who do.
Councilman Austin, I'm listening. We listened to our brother Craig DeLuz there. He's got the Republican viewpoint, and I know that when I drive around your district, I know that you have Republicans and Democrats. Let me tell you all something, boy. Around his district, he's got the most diverse district like ever. On one end is the country club. On the other end is the straight, public housing. It's really a lot that he's got to deal with, a lot of languages he has to speak. Do you hear what, some of the talking points that Craig DeLuz brought to us on today? Do you hear that from some people in your constituency, and how loud is that rhetoric?
Absolutely, Greg, and you described my district very well. It is arguably the most diverse area of the city. When you look at Long Beach being a very diverse city, large city in Southern California, the 8th district is the microcosm really of the city of Long Beach when it comes to diversity, in all kinds of diversity. I mean, in every way that you can think of, economic, socioeconomic, religious diversity, age. And yes, we have a country club, and we also have the second largest public housing development in the city and everything in between. And so absolutely. I hear from constituents who are pro recall. If you drive around the neighborhood, there are signs on the lawns supporting the recall. There are signs on the lawns that are no on the recall. And but I think Professor Dr. Samad also touched on the very, very important point that we have to get beyond partisanship and just be about engagement, right? If we are committed to engaging community, engaging our residents at whatever level of government that you're in, and then obviously on the local government level, my engagement is in coffee shops and anywhere that anybody can see me in the community. That's not so. For our state legislators and our congressional representatives, obviously they spend time away from the community, and so that's not as that they don't have the opportunity to do engagement like we would on local government. So as local government officials, we do have that responsibility to engage our residents on these even larger issues. Our larger issues like state legislation and federal legislation that impact them. And so that's something that we do, and I think we try to do it well. Engage folks, make sure they're heard, educate them on the issues. Disagree, fine. Let's disagree on the issues, but let's be neighbors and neighborly. When it's all over with. And so here we have a special community here in Long Beach, the 8th district. I think our city is on the move, on the rise. We have a dynamic mayor, city council, but engagement is really what I think separates good public discourse from or not having good public.
Let me just ask the panel. One of the things that we talked about on today was I saw some comments by Mr. DeLuz that said, hey, we ought to stop blaming the governor for COVID. He's saying nobody is saying that. It's how he handled it that we should be criticizing. And the question that comes to my mind, I'm just going to ask the panel for you to tackle it one by one. Okay, well, how should he have handled it? It just seems like, you got to go, as we say in hip hop, off the dome in face of a global, pandemic. I mean, my goodness, what are you supposed to do when people are dying and everything other than, I remember when they announced the shutdown, I was in the Hall of Administration in downtown Los Angeles, and I watched Mayor Garcetti. Yeah, he was talking as a politician, as the leader of the city, but the look on his face was like, okay, holy crap, what am I going to do? What does a leader need to do? What could Governor Newsom have done better to handle the pandemic?
Well, I'm not sure that there was anything he could. I'm sure that we had some hiccups, but I remember he was one of the first governors that was saying, okay, if we need additional breathing machines, let's get them. Who do I get them? Can I get them manufactured somewhere? Who can do it quickly? Who can get me more? There were just so many things, but I hate to just leave this one point though before we get away from it. Not only did Dr. Samad talk about engagement, but he talked about voter education. That is what really makes the difference. And guess what? It starts in school, people. It starts in school. And so I know even under this governor, and I'm gonna give a little credit even to our current U.S. Senator, when Alex Padilla was Secretary of State, he had a whole program for the high schools to become engaged in working and signing up for the polls, getting poll worker training. Dr. Weber has done a huge job of carrying that forward and making sure that there are more and more students engaged, not only at the high school level, but at the community college level. She did a whole program for that. So I think if we can get that going, because once you start that, that never leaves you. You take on that responsibility. But we have to teach each other. It's not just left to the legislature or even the teachers in school. Engagement has to take place year round. That is something that the Democratic Party has figured out. And we have hired people now to do engagement year round. We understand we do have to talk to people and hear what they say, understand, make sure they understand what policies are coming down. How can you become more engaged? How can you become aware? It's difficult, no question, with all these adversities coming on them. But still, this information is coming to them. So how do we communicate them? Where's the best place? As Councilman Austin said, is it at the coffee shop? Is it at the grocery store? Is it at your union? How do we make sure you're getting the information about what's going to impact you? There's some, as you say, Dr. Samad, there's some bad petitions coming down next year. And if we don't start telling people now how that's going to impact them, we're going to be stuck. And if we don't reform some of this policy about what you can get on a ballot, how quickly you can get on a ballot, just because someone's got millions and millions of dollars, they can put an issue on the ballot and run with it. We must have reform in that area. Now, back to your question. I think he's done an outstanding job as a governor in trying to get resources. He's a business person, so he understands business, distribution. That's critical. That's critical when you're trying to get your arms around a pandemic, or as you said, something that hasn't happened in years that most people have no clue how to handle. And so to think that we would pick one of these people, these 40-some people who have never even basically done local policy, let alone try to run a state that's the 5th largest economy in the country. No, I don't think people should feel comfortable making that decision at all. This governor has stood by us, and if you're not alive, what's more important than your health? He's followed the science. He's done the work. He's appointed. We didn't even talk about the appointments. I'm so sorry that my good friend had to leave and go to board meeting. Greg, you should have started your show an hour earlier.
Well, there's a story to how he even got on, but it's okay.
He really has done a lot in terms of when they talk about how does he support the Black agenda. I look at some of the appointments that he's made. Dr. Burke Harris, health, critical role, especially with the pandemic. Just a Supreme Court justice, LGBTQ Supreme Court justice. What does that say? Dr. Weber, the Secretary of State to me is more important than the governor. The way with voting rights, if you don't have the right Secretary of State, you're going to get screwed. And we're seeing that happening all around the country. So I think when we talk about some of these key appointments with real power to make change, I think, is he perfect? No. But fires, floods, COVID, I think you have to take those things into consideration. And so for me, it's no, vote no and go. Go, as Dr. Samad said, straight to the ballot box, straight to your mailbox, or straight to the vote center. But the answer is no.
You know, Dr. Samad, Carolyn makes a very strong point when she talks about voter education. And as she was expressing herself there, I couldn't help but think how much I appreciate the Mervyn Dymally Institute over there that you are the executive director of, because you guys are actually a think tank and analyzing and observing and assessing all of the political issues that are before us. How do you get that information out to us, the people?
Well, let me say this. When Mervyn Dymally started this think tank, it was called the California African American Political and Economic Institute. He did it when he went back to the legislature in 2002. And he called a group of us together, about 15 of us. And he said the problem with the Black community is that they're not able to discern the impact of public policy until it's too late, 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the line. So the responsibility of the Dymally Institute is to look at all of the legislation out there, federal, state, and local, that could adversely impact African Americans in the communities they live in, because it's questionable if there is a Black community anymore, but we live everywhere. So even if we're not the majority of that community, it could adversely impact us and weigh in on it. And so one of the things, that it really bothers me is that we even have some sophistication problems amongst our elected officials. A lot of folk run for office because it makes them a rock star and they can get in stuff free and stand up and do the beauty pageant thing, but it's really their responsibility to get out early and tell folk what's coming down the pike. Who does that excellently is Karen Bass, Holly Mitchell, Mark Ridley Thomas, and this new brother, Isaac Bryan, we got. They come from amongst the people. They come from organizers. So they understand, okay, there is a learning curve in our community. We got to get out here and explain this to folk. Okay. And so when we talk about, particularly ballot propositions, most of the time elected officials send out slate mailers to tell you who to vote for. And they tell you their position on most of the ballot initiatives. And most of the time, folk will either vote with that elected official, it's called influence peddling, or they will just pass on the ballot initiatives altogether. Say, I don't know nothing about this. So they just go and bullet vote the folk they want in office and they ignore the rest of the ballot. Well, this is one time bullet voting actually would work for us. If we voted no and then just put it in, that way, we don't have to worry about somebody coming up. So real quickly, Greg, my point is that the Institute, Black folk are new to this think tank game. There's over 1,100 think tanks globally, and less than 15 of them focus on Black people. And basically everything that we're experiencing now, they started planning 20 years ago. I remember going to Metro meetings on the Crenshaw line in 1986.
Yeah.
And they didn't break ground on that until 2015? And so, it's called social engineering. If we want to make sure that our kids and our grandkids have, a fair and just society to live in, we have to look at the stuff they're trying to put on now. Now they're reacting to us, they're reacting to us now. And so we have to react to their reaction to us, because that's what this whole recall thing is. They say, okay, we can't beat them in California, but we see that all of the legislation that could help them, they don't pass. So that means they sleep the ballot initiatives. So we can sneak this in as a ballot initiative, a direct democracy thing, and then confuse them. And that's all of the commercials you see, it ain't about it really ain't about Larry Elder, even though Larry Elder would cause me to go to the poll to vote, because he's a very dangerous brother and has been for 30 years, but the reality is that this guy, Cox, does a bear shit in the woods, Newsom trounced him, okay? Newsom, and now he stands a chance of being governor. And nothing but conservative thought comes out of San Diego, except Dr. Weber.
Yeah.
Okay. And that must be the Black community.
Yes.
But the bottom line is, we got to be aware. We got to be aware. And I'll say one more thing and I'll shut up. I love my Black Lives Matter people, but they was all in the streets against a sister who was a DA. Okay, ain't heard nothing from them on the recall. Can't be a one-trick pony in this game. You got to cover all bases. You got to cover all bases. They should be out in the streets on this like they was out in the streets for police abuse and misconduct. Okay, to me, that's an absence of advocacy sophistication. You claim you for the community. Well, this could do more damage to the community than a whole lot of other stuff. We got to raise our level of sophistication if we claim that that's what we do.
Well, Councilman Austin, I know that you were reelected, and you had a pretty intense campaign there. A lot of information going out there, and now you're back in office making moves. There's a lot of things happening in Long Beach, and I got to say that when you all have your Tuesday City Hall meetings, it's a thing here in Long Beach. Everybody's watching it on television, and it's probably the highest rated show on a Tuesday evening for sure, at least in Long Beach. It's crazy. We talk to everybody on the show. Oh, I gotta watch the city council meeting. I mean, it's a thing. But I'm just asking, so you hear Dr. Samad, that's rich information coming out. You hear Carolyn Fowler talking about, voter education and all of that. Then here you all come with in the city, and we got to deal with our local issues too. How do we get all of this information to the people? And what do you think is the easiest way to make it, I guess, simplest, most ready to digest for the everyday man or woman out here on the streets of Long Beach?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's one that we grapple with every day. And you have to be innovative and thoughtful, and you have to try new things to reach our voters and our constituents, not just voters. I just want to address Dr. Samad's point. Some people get elected to wave and get into things free and to become a local celebrity. I really wish that was the case. I think those days are long gone, because elected office is so much more difficult than it was. And I can speak to that. I've been in office for 9 years and going on 3 terms. Now it's in my 3rd term. And the first and only Black person ever represent this area of the city, because it's traditionally been a Republican stronghold. So Greg's point was right. You have to learn how to talk to people and meet them where they are. And that means you got to talk to conservatives. You have to talk to, people in the hood. You have to engage folks who are experiencing homelessness. You have to be, particularly in this role, you have to be accessible, and I think that's been a formula for success for me here in Long Beach, in my community thus far. And so, yes, it's innovative. Sending out a newsletter, not just once a week, but sometimes we have to send out. We bumped it up from once a week or every 2 weeks to almost every day during COVID, and we got a lot of responses from that. People really appreciate it, knowing what was going on real time every day, because the crisis that we were dealing with was pretty intense. We set up and had interns contacting seniors during COVID, right? Just calling them, doing wellness checks, just to check on them and find out how they were doing and pointing them in the directions for resources. Work that we had never really engaged in before, but that was the level of engagement we had to do to reach our constituents, but also meet their needs. And so, to your point, we have to be more innovative. We have to be creative. And we have so many more avenues and tools to work with today than we did 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And that said, there's all of these different avenues that we have to respond to, And so folks don't just write it. They don't write letters to their city council anymore, or to their legislators. They send emails, or they try to catch you on Facebook Messenger, or their Instagram, or any avenue.
Or they out you guys. They tweet on you and you respond right away.
They tweet us or tag us, exactly. So it's different, different motto today, and you have to be on your toes and open and willing to communicate with the constituencies.
All right, good stuff.
That's engagement.
Right. So you have all of these, great resources changing every day. This is a good thing. And hopefully we're doing the right thing even here and educating the listeners, the viewers, the voters about, what this recall is all about. We heard a variety of perspectives on today, and that was really, really good. I'd like for you all to take on this question here. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but, let's dive into it real quick before we go. How is this recall different than the Gray Davis?
You want me to go first?
I think
Go
you
ahead.
should.
Well, what happened was, remember Gray Davis, what got Gray Davis recalled was the gasoline tax hike. Okay, so the Republicans used that as an opportunity. They lost a close election, and they used that as an opportunity because California, of course, is a transit state. Everybody drives. Okay, they made a big deal out of it. Now, had the Democrats stuck together, Gray Davis most likely would have beat that recall. But what happened was his lieutenant governor, Cruz Bustamante, hedged his bet and put himself, if you in favor of Gray Davis's recall, you know, who would you like to see governor? Remember, we had just as many folk, a whole lot of folk. Well, what happened was Cruz Bustamante put himself on the ballot.
Defected.
And what happened was the Latino vote went with him, particularly Latino vote in Central California. Okay. And he was on the ballot prior to Arnold Schwarzenegger declaring, because Schwarzenegger came in late. And at that point, they underestimated the power of celebrity. Remember, Jesse Ventura had just won the governorship of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Schwarzenegger's in that same genre, wrestler, muscle builder, you know, action figure, all of that. And so basically they caught the Democrats sleeping. Mm-hmm. And that's how we ended up with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, I think you were right, spot on. I can just recall where I was, and I was working with then Senator Kevin Murray, and he was state senator at the time, and there were a couple of other issues that were happening as well, and we were having power outages, rolling blackouts throughout the state. And then there was the vehicle license fee issue. I think that was even more so than the gas tax. Because that impacted everybody, affected everybody. Our vehicle license fees were a lot more steeper, and that was probably just a bad call by the legislature and the governor to sign that at the time. And people revolted. There was a celebrity dynamic, as you mentioned, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and let's just call it what it is. There's a personality challenge there too, right? People still have to kind of like their elected officials, right? And there was a likability issue with Governor Davis. He didn't really connect with the rest of the voters. He was a Democrat. He was a smart guy. He had served for many years in many different capacities. But there was I think it was a likability factor with the celebrity dynamic kind of clashing at the same time. And obviously the defection of the lieutenant governor, who thought he was doing, probably being a team player, but turns out he wasn't.
No, he wasn't a team player. He saw that as an opportunity for him to potentially be governor. Let's be clear. But it was a lesson learned. It was a calamity of errors. And let me just these people are Hollywood. The star power of Arnold was, no one had anticipated that. Nobody saw him coming even as a candidate, number one. And then, of course, remember who his wife was. Remember who his wife was.
And she was a high-powered Democrat.
Who she had
brought a whole lot of white women with her.
Remember, she was she had been running a lot of big women issues too. So she got the disability community behind him, which is huge, particularly in this state. I just, you start remembering, it's good, the deja vu, you start remembering all those things coming together. But no, people were more mad about the gas tax than the license fee. I'm sorry, because they have to pay that gas every day. The license is once a year. But she helped him and elevated Arnold so well. And people were like, oh, Maria Shriver, and she's a Democrat. How bad can he be? I mean, but
all my students, I was teaching at the time, all my students was like talking about governor of the year. I tell them all the time, y'all the reason we ended up with this, okay? Because the students went with it.
Yeah, but he wasn't well liked. I mean, he wasn't charismatic at all. And the other thing was he had a problem in the legislature. People called the state, nobody was answering the phone. Nobody would call people back. That hurt a lot. And so all of that together, people were like, he's got to go. And he had no money built up, or remember, things had been cut. So the money situation was horrible, as Dr. Samad mentioned when Jerry took over, and Jerry had to cut. So we were Gray didn't have anywhere near the revenue situation that Gavin has to fall back on. You know, he could talk about the economy, even though we had COVID and everything else, we still weren't doing bad economy wise. So it's interesting, but I just, in closing, say systems of oppression like this recall target our families. We have to be clear. It targets our family. And so we must meet the moment. Rise up.
Okay.
And as you said, everybody should be in the streets. Everybody should be in the streets saying, vote.
Well,
no.
I think our political infrastructure is a lot different today than it was in 2002, 2003 as well. So we have the ability to reach more people. This last election, we pulled more people out to vote than ever before. That data is still very fresh. And over the next 4 or 5 days, I'm sure that, we're going to be turning folks out in a big way.
More folks. More
Yes.
folks. 6 million people have voted, but there's 22 million registered. So we got ways to go. Did we lose Greg?
No, I'm here. Here I am. Yeah. No, we've got a ways to go. I really appreciate each and every one of you for coming on and town hall meeting. Hopefully we're doing an effective job of sharing information and perspectives, on this whole thing, giving us something to think about. The one thing I'm taking away from it is, hey, A, vote no. Well, no, that's B. For A is to get out there and vote. Don't sit it out, y'all. Don't do that, But B is vote no on the recall, and it's that's the kind of thing that it is, As we get ready to leave out of here, I want one last question for you, Councilman. Is I heard today, just before we went on, I saw headlines that President Biden is coming to Long Beach. There, what is the conversation going to be like?
With cats out the bag, we're going to be happy to host our president as well as our governor here in Long Beach on Monday. This will be a GOTV activity. So we will be engaged and throughout the next few days working to get the vote out. But the last time we had a president, we had President Obama visited us in 2009. But he was just stopped through, parked Air Force One on the airport. President Clinton actually came, I believe it was in 1994, and, spoke to several thousand people. I know that this is going to be quite the event on Monday, so join us if you can. I don't know the details quite yet. I don't know what the details will be. That's all kind of...
Carolyn knows, she on the DNC. It's an inside deal.
Wear your mask, comfortable shoes.
I was a delegate for President Biden, Biden-Harris ticket, so I'm waiting for my call.
Waiting for your call, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
That's one of them invitation only deals, right? Exactly.
Right.
You need to go out there and get in line now.
All right. Any last words for the people, Councilman?
No, just make sure we get out to vote. This is critically important. This election is, something that we didn't foresee. There's a lot of voter apathy, voter fatigue, activist fatigue as well. But this is not the time to go to sleep. It's really easy to get that ballot and vote no. Mm-hmm. It'll be a short ballot, short and sweet.
All right. Dr. Samad, any last words you want to say to the people?
Well, we had a Millennial Gen Z symposium last year, just before COVID hit, our second, and the title was Thinking Lives Matter. Yeah, Black Lives Matter, but we have to stomp out anti-intellectualism, particularly around this vaccination. They want to talk about Tuskegee experiments. Remember, Black people died in the Tuskegee experiments because they withheld the vaccine from us,
Correct.
not because they gave us the vaccine. We got to just think through some things. And then this recall, we just need to vote. And if there's an election next year, why are we spending all that? Would make me mad if I was a first-time voter or someone who was, a voter unsophisticated. I'd be like, why are we doing this? No. Okay. And I'm just telling everybody to think through it. Thinking lives matters.
Carolyn, any last words you want to say to the people?
I think my two brothers have said it all. I think it's clear what you need to be doing. And I know how women vote in this state, so I'm counting on all of my sisters, allies, and all to do what we need to do. The Women's Caucus has been out there. We've been partnering with the California Black Women's Collective and Congressmembers Bass and Congressmember Lee have developed a war, Women Against the Recall. So we've all been partnering out there and stomping every day, postcards, texts, tweets, phone calls, and I know that we're not going to stop. And I think I'm with Dr. Samad on the 15th. We'll be very proud. We'll be very proud of the work that we put in and what can happen. You have to show them. Sometimes you can't tell people. You just have to show them.
You could show them better than you could tell them. That's right.
Maybe we can all come back together on Coffee Conversations with Greg J on the 16th. I think that's the Thursday.
Yeah.
And chop it up. Okay.
Have a post-election analysis.
Post-election analysis. I think that'll be a good thing. I'll get on your calendar
the day after.
Yes, I'll get on your calendar, Councilman Austin and Dr. Samad, Carolyn Fowler. Thank you. And I'm gonna reach out to our guy, Mr. Craig DeLuz, also.
Oh yeah, we'd love to see him.
Yeah.
Right. He'll be busy that
day. All right, y'all. There you have it. Look, you heard a lot on this time. We've been up about an hour and a half, and I want to thank all of you who took the time to check this out. If you missed it live, that's okay. It's on a lot of different Facebook pages. You can check that out. It'll be there on demand. It'll be on demand at beachcityradio.com. We're gonna also take the audio and post it on our podcast, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts, Spreaker, iHeart, Spotify, just go. And it'll be under, Coffee Conversations with Greg J. What a great week we've had. And hopefully today, this evening, the special town hall meeting, from the bottom of my heart, I thank all of our panelists for saying yes and just giving us some really substance, right? This is all about the community. What are we, let's get the experts together. Let's listen to what our brothers and sisters in high places have to say so that we can make informed decisions, and make a difference in this country. All right, y'all. Well, there it is. Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Pleasure to see all of you guys.
Pleasure to be on the
panel.
We got to do this more often.
Yes, we do. You got a deal. All right, y'all. Love one another and peace and blessings.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Day. Thank you so much for tuning in to the town hall meeting Perspectives as we examine the California Gubernatorial Recall Election. What a great panel we have today. Been searching around the community, with questions and observations and, hearing from the NAACP. And we heard from Mr. Callender, the president of the state NAACP. And now we turn our lens and our ears to the Long Beach branch of the NAACP. And Dr. Janice Fowler is here with us. Good afternoon, good evening. How are you today?
Good afternoon. I'm doing just great. What about yourself?
Doing all right, out here just trying to contemplate things there, Dr. Janice. I'm saying, man, why do we have to go back to the polls?
I know. It's just one of those things, just like the pandemic.
Well, as a community influencer involved with the storied organization of like the NAACP, what's the message now we should be hearing from the organization about voting?
Okay, well, the message from the Long Beach branch of the NAACP is a reminder that we are, of course, nonpartisan. So we don't endorse candidates or political parties. What we do is we advocate for all to vote, by mail or in person. And, for this recall election, the polls will be open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on September 14th, which is next Tuesday, I believe. And if you have not mailed in your vote, it's not too late. It has to be postmarked also by Tuesday the 14th, or you can vote in person at your local voting polls. And if you decide that you're going to mail it in, remember that it must be postmarked by Tuesday the 14th, or like I said, you can vote in person.
Now in Los Angeles County, we can vote early. Yeah.
Yes. The polls I think have been open since September 4th. And so you don't have to wait until September 14th. Not all polls are open right now, but there are a few that are, and you can just type in your zip code and look online.
Excellent information. Now, what would you say to the people that are saying, I'm just going to sit this one out?
I would say, please, it's your civic duty. It's your right. If you want things to be changed in your community or your country, you need to vote. It's it's for the people. That's what our country was founded on. That's why we have a democracy, so that people have a voice. So use your voice. What is it that you care about? What is it that you're passionate about? Your vote makes a difference.
Well, there you have it. Important information from the Long Beach branch in AACP, Dr. Janice Fowler. Any last things you want to say to the people?
I think I just want to say that this is very important. All elections are important because, this one that's, for next week, is based on recalling Governor Newsom. So, your voting is no, you do not support the recall, or yes, you do support it, and mark your ballot for who you support rather than Newsom. So, exercise your right to vote.
Exercise your right to vote. All right, y'all, let's get back to the town hall meeting.